Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your May astrological report. I am recording this from north of England in Lincolnshire, and I am here beginning my 2025 European tour. Of a little more information on that in a few minutes. Remember, if you want to get right to the forecast, there'll be a link in the below in the description. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, there will be a link that'll take you to the beginning of the forecast. It normally takes a few days after I post it, but we'll get up a link so that you can go to any day, and it will take you specifically to that day in the forecast. I have a lot coming up in May, but before we get to do that, I want to let you know that every month we draw a winner from my email list for a free astrological reading, mostly focused on your harmonic aspects in your natal chart. And in order to make sure you're on that email list, you go to www.ricklevineastrologer.com. This month's winner is Johnny Fernandez. And every month, my assistant Gail assigns numbers, uses a program to assign numbers to everyone on the email list. And then it randomly chooses a number. This month was number 7775. And that's Johnny Fernandez. You will receive an email from us and schedule your free reading. Congratulations to you. I'd also like to remind everyone that you can go to patreon.com/Rick Levine and sign up for various levels of subscription, including getting the mid-month update and all the way up through chart interpretation classes and my apprentice program. Information is on patreon.com. And also, I'd like to remind everyone that for the next couple of months, I will not be at Astrology Night. There will be no Astrology Night at Soul Food Coffee House because I am on the road. The next event at Soul Food Coffee House will be, it'll be really the July event, but instead of being the first Friday night of the month, because that's a holiday in the United States, that's Independence Day, July 4th, the next event will be on June 27th. And if you want to mark your calendars now, I will, of course, let you know in the upcoming forecasts. Now, the first event that I have coming up on this little speaking tour is Shifts Happen that I'm doing with Steve Judd and along with Nick Campion, Alex Trenoweth, and Penny Thornton. And obviously, for anyone who's thinking about coming, it may be a bit late to come in person, but there is a virtual conference that we will be now producing. There was so much request for it from all of you that Steve has made it possible, and you can go to the link, and the links to all the clickable links to the events will be in the first pinned comment below. That's not the description, but you'll go to the comments and there'll be a clickable link so that you can join us for one of the full days or one of the half days or for the entire 4-day conference. And you can join us from the comfort of your own living room or wherever you are on the planet without having to fly into London or to come to the UK. That's May 2nd through the 5th. That's coming up this weekend. And so some of you who are watching this later in the month may have already missed that event. The next event that I will be on this tour is the weekend of May 9th through the 12th. And that will be the 4th International Portuguese Astrology Conference in Porto, Portugal. And again, the link is below for that. I will be teaching a mini course during that conference, aside from a lecture on the conference schedule. The next event that I have coming up will be the following weekend, and that'll be the weekend of May 17th and 18th. That'll be the Happy Souls Festival in Stockholm. This is the Stockholm International Astrology Conference. Again, if you're in the area or can get to Stockholm, there's going to be a very interesting event that's going to be a combination of a festival and a conference. And this is the Happy Souls Festival. And again, the link is below, May 17th, 18th. On the following 2 days after the conference, the 19th and 20th, I will be doing a separate 2 day workshop, and this will be my 2 day chart interpretation program, which is kind of like bringing the planets down to Earth. I call this astrology in the trenches, taking chart readings to the next level. I'll be doing this 2 day workshop in a few locations over the next few weeks. And the first one will be in Stockholm on May 19th and 20th. And again, the link for more information and or registration is in the first pinned comment down below. The next event that I have will be on the weekend of May 31st to June 1st. And that'll be another weekend workshop of taking chart readings to the next level. It'll be similar to the event in Stockholm, the 2 day workshop. And it's basically a deep dive on natal chart analysis. On all these 2 day workshops, we'll be using charts of participants in the class as part of the class curriculum in doing the work that we'll be doing. Complete descriptions on all of these are at the various sites that we will be linking to down below. Milan, Italy, May 31st, June 1st. The next event in this little speaking tour will be the Copenhagen Astrology Congress, and that's All Time Astrology 2025. This will be the weekend of June 6th, 7th, and 8th. And I'll be doing a keynote talk on that. And I'm quite excited about that because I'll be talking about something that's been an interest of mine for well over 30 years. And I roughly call this quantum astrology, but the relationship between quantum physics and the astrology that we moderners practice. And I'll be doing this, of course, in Copenhagen, which was the home of Niels Bohr, who was the kind of significant mover and shaker pioneer of the delve that physics took into the subatomic realm and particle physics, subatomic physics that became known as quantum mechanics. That'll be June 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then again, I will be doing the 2 day hands-on natal chart interpretation workshop, and that'll be on June 10th and 11th in Copenhagen. Links are down below. And then that brings us up to mid-June. I'll be heading home to Seattle. I also have coming up later in the season on September 5th, 6th, and 7th, Kepler College is hosting a symposium in Niagara Falls, New York. And I'll be doing a keynote on that symposium schedule and offering a master course also there. And again, the link for that, if you're interested, it will be with all the other links down below. That's September 5th, 6th, and 7th. Then mid-October, October 15th through 19th, the Organization for Professional Astrology, that's OPA. The OPA retreat will be back in Park City, Utah, where we were last year. It's a magnificent venue. This year, the title of the conference is Cosmic Shift, Connecting in a New Era. And I will be participating in that, doing 3 days of very deep work with a small group. When you go to the OPA conferences, you actually don't just go to a large conference. You commit to working 3 days with one particular astrologer. And the link to the website will give you a clue and information on all the astrologers that will be offering particular courses, 3 day deep dive courses at this OPA retreat in Park City, Utah, October 15th through the 19th. And then the last event I want to mention is I'm going back to Goa, and this is the Initiation into Astrology 2025. This will be from November 20 to December 2nd, November 20th to December 2nd. This again is hosted by Heaven and Earth Workshops. If you go to heavenandearthworkshops.com and look for the retreats or the events, the Initiation to Astrology is there. The link that'll take you right to that page also will be down below. This is, I think, the fourth time I've been to this particular Ayurvedic healing spa that's in Palolem Beach at the south end of Goa, a beautiful facility, a beautiful swimmable beach. We're about a 3 or 4 minute walk down to the beach. And this is an amazing event. Information complete day by day. Activities and curriculum are listed on the Heaven and Earth workshops. This is great if you've never been to India before. Heaven and Earth Workshops does everything from picking you up at the airport when you arrive to taking you back to your flight. And in between that, you're pretty much in good hands. It's a really wonderful thing, and I will not say more about that now, other than that's already filling up. And so if you're interested in that and have any questions, either contact Heaven and Earth Workshops or send me an email, and we'll handle those now because this will probably fill up. And of course, because it's to India, it'll take some time to, kind of put together logistics for most people. So that's it. I wanted to move through these pretty quickly. Again, the links to all of these events are down below in the first comment that's pinned to the top. All right, so let's talk about May. Phew. Actually, before we talk about May, let's talk about March and April and the wider picture of what's going on, because May, in some ways, is still part of this larger trajectory of shift that I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about. But to some extent, the first wave of absolute crazy danger zone intensity is over. Now, that doesn't mean that things are going to be smooth sailing. It doesn't mean that there's going to be, nothing happening. In fact, there's a lot of things that are up over these next weeks and months ahead. But I think to some extent, many of us are feeling battle weary already just because of the speed at which just crazy shit has happened. I mean, just stuff that has come, that has been put in our faces, things we've had to deal with. And I think to some extent that what's going on through May is a period of assimilation, but it doesn't mean that there's no too many negatives. However, although we'll have some time to assimilate what's been going on, we'll also be confronted with a lot of new things. What's significant is that the first part of this year has been a series of retrogrades that began back around the presidential election in the United States back in November, when Mars opposed Pluto. And then Mars turned retrograde. It opposed Pluto again in January, through that whole period of time that culminated in Donald Trump's inauguration on January 20th. And then Mars turned direct, and toward the end of April, actually on April 26th, Mars opposed Pluto for the third and final time. Mars is now out of Cancer, back into Leo, and heading toward new territory. And I think we feel a little bit of a kind of a release from this pending energy that was in front of us, that was just felt overwhelmingly difficult, uncertain, doomed almost. By the same token, we have Mercury having already come out of its retrograde shadow, and Venus, which is kind of completing its retrograde shadow, and will move out of its shadow by May 15th. But we begin the month of May with Venus actually having just moved into Aries, pushed into Aries, and it lining up with Neptune. And even Venus, we're feeling like there's a clean energy. We're feeling like we're moving forward once that Venus gets through its conjunction with Neptune. And on top of all of this, on May 4th, Pluto turns retrograde. Now, when when a planet like Venus or Mercury turns retrograde, we know it because it's moving quite quickly and it screeches to a halt, at least it looks that way, and turns backwards, at least it looks that way. But we can feel the difference of moving forward and then all of a sudden moving in the opposite direction. Pluto, however, when it turns retrograde, it barely is moving. Pluto is actually at 3 degrees and 49 minutes of Aquarius. It's about 3 3/4 degrees of Aquarius on May 1st. On May 31st, Pluto has backed up to 3 degrees and 39 minutes. It's backed up 1/6 of a degree. It's just barely moving at all. It's holding still. Now, remember that when planets move slower, they have more inertia. Their energy becomes denser, if you will, which is why on days that inner planets like Mercury, Venus, even Mars turn direct or retrograde, those days are often the most intense in that change of direction. And so Pluto, because it barely moves all month, is holding a lot of weight. But it's important to understand that Mars has already opposed Pluto. And so the danger of that energy, of that power struggle exploding, is basically past. Again, it doesn't mean we're out of the woods. It doesn't mean that it means that there's still plenty of room for things to happen. But things are going to be settled a bit more, and the change is going to continue on the same rate or maybe even faster, but it's not going to feel quite as overwhelming through this month. There are a few key dates that we'll get to where we may feel a bit more disruption. And there are a few things that are cooking in the background that before we look at the day by day charts, I want to mention. The first thing that is of great significance is that Chiron, which is about a 50-year cycle, is joining up with, it's making its first of three conjunctions with Eris, which is a 500-year cycle. Now, many astrologers are not yet using Eris on a regular basis, but I always like to remind astrologers that if you were living in the late 1700s, you may have been slow to adapt to using Uranus. It was new. What do you do with it? If you were living in the early or mid 1930s, you may not have used Pluto right away, which was discovered in 1931. You may not have used it right away because it's like, what am I going to do with this? The same was true in the late 70s, even early 80s, after Chiron was discovered. Most astrologers did not just jump in and start using Chiron, but now it's rare for astrologers to not use Chiron because it's obviously shown how important it is. Well, the same is true with Eris, which is a Kuiper belt object, kind of like Pluto. It's out a ways further, but we know that distance doesn't matter. Just because Pluto is out so far doesn't make it less potent. Eris is Mars's sister. And Eris and Mars and Pluto all have affinity to one another because they can all be a bit uncontrollable, a bit nasty, a bit complicated to deal with. And yet Eris has a particular blessing attached to it. Eris is known as the bringer or sower of chaos or disorder. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound good, but Eris likes to stir things up, not because she wants to create disorder, but because she wants to see what is not quite fitting in and where the potential problems are. And if things get stirred up, then the obvious things that become, that show during that period of time are the things that can be worked on to be integrated at a higher level of consciousness. And so, as we have Chiron the original mentor, the healer who heals often out of an old wound that doesn't cure, won't cure, can't cure, and yet Chiron isn't put out of his misery just because he has a critical wound. Instead, he goes through life helping others, teaching others, and healing others. And as Chiron approaches Eris, and remember at the beginning of the month, Chiron and Eris are just barely 1 degree apart. So all through May, we're feeling it. By the end of May, they're 3 minutes of arc apart. They make their exact conjunction on May 26th. But I don't expect May 26th in itself to be a key date, other than the fact it's also a new moon, which does make it a key date. But from the standpoint of the conjunction between Chiron and Eris, I think all month we're dealing with the realization that the old fears, old hurts, old wounds that don't want to cure, they're not going to be resolved by us going into denial about them and then projecting those wounds onto others. Instead, this is a call to do the inner work. This is a call to go to those Eris parts of ourselves that are ready to get crazy at the first notice of disorder and to get all worked up and to deal with those energies so that they don't create the disarray, the chaos, and the disorder that they might. Now, I said that the conjunction of Chiron and Eris will happen 3 times. The first time is on May 26th of this, of 2025, this month. Then on the retrogrades, they will occur again on October 8th. And then the third and final time they will occur next March, March 19th, 2026. So we're entering into a period of time where the awareness around healing our wounds is going to be increasingly important. And I would remind us all that we can look outside of ourselves and see the social wounds. We can see how bent out of shape our reality is on the cultural level, on the economic level, on the political level. But those are projections of what goes on inside each and every one of us individually. And so this is a double call. It's a call to pay attention to what's happening out there and make moves towards resolving these wounds that won't heal. And yet at the same time, it's also a call to go inner, to go within, and to face these wounds that basically can create situations that become more and more harmful or complex if we're in denial over them. These involve some real courage to face these deepest and darkest parts of ourselves as we come to terms with what's going on, both in our personal lives and in the larger collective. That's the first underlying message or theme of the month of April. The second, actually, maybe it's the first, and I've already mentioned it a little bit, and that is Mercury, Venus, and Mars are all moving into new territory. They're all cleared from the complexities that we've had to face in the first part, in the first few months of the year, in particular in March and April, but going all the way back to the beginning of the year, going all the way back, for that matter, to the end of October, beginning of November in 2024. The third thing that I want to mention is that by the end of May, Saturn moves from Pisces, where it's been since March of 2023. Saturn moves from Pisces into Aries. Now, remember, Neptune has just recently moved from Pisces into Aries. It did that at the end of March. And so we've had April already with Neptune in Aries, but Neptune spends 14 years in a sign, and so its return to Aries is really the first time since the early 18 since 1861 when Neptune last moved from Pisces into Aries. Saturn moves from Pisces into Aries every 29 and a half years because Saturn is a 29 and a half, 30-year cycle. The thing to understand about this transition of Saturn moving from Pisces into Aries, which it does every just short of 30 years, is that it's doing it and it's lining up with Neptune. It's conjoining Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries. Now, that exact conjunction doesn't occur until February of 2026. But throughout the month of May, as Saturn gets closer and closer to the end of Pisces, it actually enters Aries on May 24th. But what that means is that because Saturn is moving faster than Neptune, Saturn actually just barely catches up to Neptune as it moves on the 24th of May into Aries. Neptune has already just moved into Aries. And so they're just barely a degree or so apart, a little bit over a degree apart. And by later this summer, Neptune will get within about a quarter of a degree of Neptune. Saturn will get within about a quarter of a degree of Neptune, and then it turns retrograde. And then Neptune turns retrograde. And the two back up into Pisces. And then they turn direct again, and then it's in February when Neptune has moved into Aries and Saturn moves into Aries, and then the two join up. Why is that significant this month in May? Because all month Saturn is getting closer and closer and closer to Neptune. And what that means is that as various planets make aspects to the end of Pisces, beginning of Aries, meaning a planet will make an aspect to Saturn. The first one we'll look at is the Sun's half square to Saturn. That's exact on May 2nd. We'll get to charts in just a moment. But what that means is that at the beginning of the month, when the sun makes a half square to Saturn on May 2nd, it then makes a half square to Neptune on May 6th, 4 days later. And so we get the energy of Saturn bringing things in, making them real, kind of authoritatively saying, this is the way it is. This is the hardship. This is what you got to do. And then the same aspect is made to Neptune, and we see possibilities. We see we see potential. The imagination kicks in. Of course, we can also go to fantasy realms and go into denial. That's the danger. But at the beginning of the month, it's taking 4 days for the sun to make an aspect first to contractive Saturn and then to dreamy, imaginative Neptune, 4 days in between. And as we get closer to the end of the month, we have planets that are making an aspect to Saturn, for example, on the 25th and 26th. Mercury makes a sextile with Saturn, followed by a sextile to Neptune. And it does that like within a 24-hour period of time. And so we're getting this sense of this difficult release it. And I'll talk more about this Neptune and Saturn relationship because because Neptune is the planet of dreams and imagination, and Saturn has the potential of making it real. And it really depends on how committed we are to doing the work, Saturn, that will determine how much of our vision, Neptune, our ideals, Neptune, actually become real. Because remember, a dream is a wish your heart makes, but you have to do the hard work to materialize the imagination or the hopes of Neptune Otherwise, it just remains in the fantasy realm. So, those are some of the key and underlying pieces of the month. Let's shift gears and look at charts. And we'll take this a quick day by day through the entire month. We begin the month here looking at the chart of May 1st. And for the record, as always, all charts are Pacific time, Pacific Daylight Time now. And these charts are all noon charts. They all show Aries rising because remember, houses, the ascendant, the rising sign, and the midheaven are all based upon your local horizon. And so, because you're all over the planet, your ascendant and midheaven and houses are going to be different. And so we're looking from a mundane standpoint of just the planets and the various signs. We can see here that on May 1st, the moon has just entered Cancer. And whenever I say today, I'm always referring to the chart that's up. If I say yesterday or tomorrow, it's in reference to the day of the chart that we're looking at. We're now looking at the chart for Thursday, May 1st, and the moon has just moved into Cancer. It actually did at 12:22 a.m. This morning. And again, Pacific Daylight Time, adjust to your time zone accordingly. Not only do we see the moon in Cancer, but we also see that Venus is in the first degree of Aries. It's at 0 degrees of Aries. The other thing here to note is that Saturn at 27, almost 28 degrees of Pisces, is about 3 degrees away from Neptune, because Saturn at almost 28 degrees of Pisces has to go through 29, then 30 degrees, 0 degrees of Aries, and then up to 1 degree to catch up to Neptune. But by the end of the month, once Saturn moves into Aries, that Saturn Neptune conjunction, even though it won't be perfected until next year, and it'll come very close later in the summer, we're going to be feeling the what is real, Saturn, what is dreams, Neptune. This whole problem we've had for years now about fake news, about when people are telling the truth or lying, whose reality it is, what is real. These are all issues that we're going to be contending with. And I think that some of this is going to become pushing harder and harder throughout this month, and in particular, once Saturn moves into Aries. We can also see here that the Chiron Eris conjunction, Chiron at 24 degrees of Aries, 7 minutes, Eris at 25, Aries, 14 minutes, that they're already pretty close. They're, just over 1 degree apart, but we'll watch them as they come closer and closer together until they actually conjoin on May 26th. The other thing that we see here at the beginning of the month is that Mars at 5, almost 6 degrees of Leo at noon on Thursday of the 1st of May, what we can see is that Mars is already past the degree of its opposition. That Mars at almost 6 degrees is moving away from its opposition to Pluto. And this becomes very important because, in some ways, the intensity of the confrontation of assertion aggression to the hidden parts, the plutocracy, the rule by hidden wealth, which is different than the oligarchy, which is the rule by wealthy people. We're talking stuff that is so deep and so powerful that it's hidden, it's underground, it's not known, and we're seeing this beginning to wane. It's becoming easier as the month goes on. So that's May 1st. As we move to May 2nd, we now see that the moon at 20 degrees of Cancer is just moving past its square to Mercury in Aries. And by this afternoon, the moon will be squaring Chiron and Eris. This is a bit of emotional angst on some level. There's a bit of stuff being stirred up here. But the other thing that's happening on May 2nd is that Venus has now moved to the other side of Neptune. When we looked at May 1st, Venus was at 0 degrees of Aries, followed by Neptune. Now Neptune is followed by Venus, and that exact conjunction occurred at 10:06 a.m. But we're going to be feeling this all day. What does this mean? It means that our values, what we love, Venus, is being influenced by our imagination, Neptune. Now, this can be great. This can be high idealism. This can be being attracted to the romance, to the magic, to the vision that we have, and yet the problem can be it's also based upon a wish, which may or may not ever become real. And the problem with Venus lined up with Neptune is that we can become so enamored with the poetic, the artistic expression, with the dream that we lose track of what's real. Now, I don't think that we'll be able to get away with too much of this today because by 11:18 p.m., the sun in Taurus, in grounded, realistic, determined Taurus, makes a half square to Saturn. Now, the half square, like a square, is stressful, but a half square is highly motivational. It's like we want to do something about it. So it's like we go out to the dream realm, first part of the day, and by the later in the day, that Saturn half square to the Sun half square to Saturn is in fact making it real. But here's the interesting thing, and that is that by May 6th, the sun will be making a half square to Neptune. And so that difference between the sun's half square to Saturn, the need to deal with the authority and the reality is gradually replaced by the, well, maybe there's room still to make my dream come true. And we'll see that come into fruition by the time we get to May 6th. But here on Friday, the 2nd, we do have that sun making that half square with Saturn. We're also getting a push from the cosmos to turn things into something bigger, more important than they are, to stir up our energy, because we're having Jupiter making a half square to Mars. Well, it's actually Mars is the faster moving. Mars is making the half square to Jupiter. And that's exact on May 3rd. Let's move the chart ahead to May 3rd. And we can see here that by May 3rd, the moon has moved from Cancer into Leo. It does that this morning at 4:28 a.m. But by noon, it's almost caught up with Mars. In fact, by later this afternoon, this early this evening, that moon will be exactly lined up with Mars. Earlier, just before noon, the moon will be opposing Pluto. We may get a replay of some of the stuff that didn't come through back on April 26th when Mars was exactly opposed to Pluto. This is a little bit of an instant replay on that. So we may see a bit of complications of our energy occurring during this particular transition. And especially because the Mars now is making and therefore the moon, since it's Mars and moon together, is making that half square with Jupiter. We're tempted to double down. We're tempted to be overconfident and make something seem even better than it is. And we need to be careful about that because if we do that, we will eventually pay the price. On May 4th, we can see that the moon is now in mid degrees, midday on Sunday the 4th. The moon is in mid degrees of Leo. Our inclination is to feel something and express it. I mean, in some ways, with the moon and Mars in Leo, there's a little bit of a party atmosphere, especially still playing off of that half square to Jupiter, although it's separating now. It's still there. But the other thing that occurs here on the 4th is that Pluto is technically stationary. It's really not any different than it has been for a few days. I mean, even on the first of the month, Pluto was at 3 degrees and 49 minutes of Aquarius. And here on the 4th, it's still at 3 degrees 49 minutes. It has not moved 1 minute of arc, 1/60th of a degree. And in fact, on May 10th, I mean, that's a full week down the road, Pluto is still at 3 degrees and 49 minutes. So, for all practical purposes, I think it's overstating the fact that Pluto is stationary today. It's stationary for the first 10 days of the month, the last few days of April, even. And that emphasizes that Plutonic energy. The other thing that is important that is occurring is that Mercury, which is moving along pretty well right now, Mercury is kind of gaining speed at its as it's coming toward, it moves towards the end of Aries. It'll actually move into Taurus by the 10th. It'll catch up with the sun. This is Mercury really moving quickly. And the other thing that we can see is that Mercury is coming into a sextile with Jupiter. Here we see Jupiter at 22 degrees, Mercury at 20 degrees. And so Mercury is coming into that, but Mercury is moving almost 2 degrees a day. And here, as we move to Monday the 5th, we can see Mercury at 22 degrees of Aries making a sextile to Jupiter. What does this mean? This has to do with smooth communication, Mercury and Venus in Aries. We're saying things that we might not have said last month or the month before. We're figuring out things as we go along. Mercury coming into that sextile with Jupiter, we're overstating things. We're still playing off of that Mars semi-square to Jupiter. And in fact, Mercury is coming into a conjunction with Chiron. That's exact on this tomorrow on the 6th. And so it may be that we say more than we intend, and then we have to deal with how those words can either hurt or wound someone we care about, or maybe hurt someone we care about, but maybe even more so, hurt someone we don't even know or don't care about. And so we have to be careful about how we say what we say. Sometimes with that Mercury in Aries, it's easier to say something before we think about the consequences or the ramifications of what we say. Um, that is the 5th. Now, as we get to the 6th, we can see also that the sun is making its half square to Neptune. And remember, I talked about this back on the 2nd when the sun was making its half square to Saturn. So now things are opening up a bit more based upon the kind of maybe contractive energies or the feeling like we had stuff that we had to do. Now things are opening up, things are moving, and we're motivated to basically walk into our dream, to walk into the idea of what is potential, what the potential is, what is possible. Now here also on the 6th, we have Venus making a sextile with Pluto. This is important because Pluto is stationary. And so Venus, when it makes that sextile with Pluto, and it's exact at 2:31 p.m. Um, and this is we're attracted to Venus. We like the idea, Venus, of going deep. Venus in Aries is ready to go to new places. And it's almost like the excitement of this new stuff creates some intensity of going to places where we're not fully in control. And Venus sextile Pluto is the drive to move into places that have more meaning even if they're not comfortable. And understand also that Venus is making a sextile to Pluto, but Venus will eventually make that make a trine to Mars on the other side, and that Venus trine Mars is exact on May 22nd. It'll take a while for it to get there, but it's, not very far away right now. It's already only, I mean, the Venus to Mars is about 4 degrees, but because Mars and Venus are both moving, it'll take a while for that Venus to catch up to that trine. And yet, this is a smooth expression of Venus. Venus in Aries now is working for us. That being attracted to things that we like, things that are new, things that are, let's say, things that are impulsive, I think in some ways work for us. And sometimes that's very dangerous, but I think right now there is a healthiness to that energy. The other thing that's going on, as I mentioned yesterday on May 5th, is that we also have Mercury coming into its conjunctions with Chiron and Eris. Its conjunction with Chiron is at 6:47 p.m. today on the 6th. You can see here at noon, the Mercury at 23, 59, almost 24 degrees, and Chiron at 24, 24. But if we were to move this one day ahead, we can now see that Mercury is on the other side of its conjunction with Chiron and Eris. And Mercury conjoins Eris at 8 a.m. today on the 7th, on Wednesday the 7th. And this again is about communication, but the communication now is about taking things to an Eris place, to saying things that may be a bit disruptive, just to see where the energy can be exposed. By the way, although I didn't mention it, the moon moves from Leo into Virgo. It did that on Monday, I'm sorry I didn't mention that, but it did that on Monday afternoon at 12:39 p.m. And we can see here now that the moon is already at 23 degrees, almost 24 degrees of Virgo, which means that today and even yesterday, and for to some extent even later through tonight, that moon moving through Virgo, we're inclined to want to figure out what's right, to do the effective and efficient thing, to be, careful about what we express. And in some ways, I think this is a bit of a balance to the Mercury in Aries, which is I don't want to say a bit out of control, but it's excitable. And especially as it goes over Chiron and Eris, I think it has a very strong role to play. And it may, in fact, encourage us to say things that then we don't even feel comfortable with what we have spoken out loud. That is on the 7th. On the 8th, the moon moves into Libra just after midnight at 12:06 a.m. As it moves into Libra early in the morning on Thursday, the 8th, the moon will oppose Neptune. In fact, just prior to that, it'll oppose Saturn and then Neptune. So again, we go through that constraint Saturn and then the openness of Neptune. By midday on Thursday, the moon is opposing Venus. There's a bit of energy about getting our feelings kind of stretched between what we need and the needs of other people. It's a self to other kind of a thing. And I think we need to try to have understanding in any form of social relationship right now. Also, as the moon is moving through the early degrees of Libra, it's making a trine with Pluto, again, deepening the energy, deepening our ability, or let's say expanding our energy to go to places that are deep. That is on Thursday, the 8th. Thursday on Friday the 9th, we can see that the moon is now moving through mid Libra. By later in the day, the moon will be opposing the Chiron, Eris, and Mercury. But other than that, there's not a lot of exact aspects happening here on the 9th. But look at Mercury at 28 degrees and 48 minutes. That's almost 29 degrees of Aries, which means that when we go to Saturday the 10th, we now have Mercury in Taurus. This is a change of territory, a change of energy. Instead of wanting to say the first thing that's on our mind, to speak our piece, whatever we're thinking, now we want to be more determined. Now that Mercury in Taurus is more interested in getting to where it needs to go rather than just blurting out whatever it is that it's thinking. There's more of a sense of methodical communication rather than impulsive communication. Um, and that will be with us all the way through May 25th when Mercury leaves Taurus and enters Gemini, and it's at home in Gemini. Mercury isn't fully, I don't want to say fully functional. It's not fully at home in Taurus. Taurus is a Venus sign, and in Taurus, Mercury will often want to say something that's nice or that's sweet, maybe be even overly obstinate or stubborn. It's not very adaptable for sure. And part of good communication is give and take and adaptability. That's on the 10th. On the 10th also, we have the moon moving into Scorpio at just afternoon. Here you can see at noon it's at 29 degrees of Libra. And if we move this to May 11th, we can see that the moon now is in mid Scorpio on Sunday the 11th. There's not a lot of direct action or perfected aspects. Although two things I want to note. One is we can see now that Mercury is solidly at 2 degrees of Taurus. It's definitely left Aries. We can also see that the sun is getting closer and closer to Uranus. Remember that sun catches up to Uranus, the sun-Uranus conjunction. Um, which is actually an important conjunction. It only happens once a year, and it's often a time when we kind of break out of or break through things, and that'll happen on May 17th. So we can see that over the next week, that sun will catch up to Uranus, but we're feeling more and more a need to express our individuality, to look at things in a unique and exciting way and not be constrained by the status quo, or even if we are constrained by the rigidity or fixedness of the Taurus energy, as the sun gets closer and closer to Taurus, it's almost like we can't hold the energy in. Something needs to happen. That's May 11th. On the 12th, we have a couple of things happening. We have on the 12th, we have a new moon at 9:55 a.m. As we move to the 12th, we can see that the moon in mid-Scorpio actually reaches its full moon phase. The actual full moon itself is at 9:55 a.m., and that occurs at 22 degrees and 13 minutes of Scorpio. And that moon is opposing the sun. But you see, the thing here that we need to note is that just a few hours after that full moon, the full moon will then oppose Uranus. This is a full moon, not a new moon. I don't know if I said new moon earlier, but it's a full moon in Scorpio. And the full moon will oppose Uranus. And in fact, we're getting closer and closer to the sun's conjunction with Uranus, which again happens on the 17th. We're just 5 days away from that. So this energy of this Uranian breakthrough, of the upset, of the revolution, of the surprise, of the shock, we're feeling this right now, but there's a lot of fixed energy. We have Pluto in fixed sign Aquarius, we have Mars in fixed sign Leo, we have the moon in fixed sign Scorpio, and we have Mercury, the sun, and Uranus in fixed sign Taurus. So there's a lot of energy that's not moving. But the important thing about this full moon, aside from the role that Uranus is playing, we're setting the seed, we're planting the seed, but it's going to take a few days for it to explode into fruition. But the other thing here that's significant is that Mercury at 3 degrees of Taurus is making its exact square to Pluto at 3 degrees of Aquarius. And that exact Mercury-Pluto square occurs at 10:23 a.m., which is like just barely a half an hour after the full moon itself. Meaning, that this full moon in Scorpio, what's Scorpio's modern associated planet or ruler, modern ruler, is Pluto. And it's Mercury that is squaring Pluto. And so someone's holding on to something here that is very, very powerful, very strong, and yet something may come out into the open. There's a release of energy. It may take for a few days for it to play on through as the sun actually reaches its conjunction with Uranus. This is one of the most important few days of the month, I think. And this Mercury square at the time of the full moon, I think, is incredibly important. Also, the moon is coming into a trine with Saturn, and Saturn is at almost 29 degrees of Pisces now. Remember, Saturn is getting closer day by day to moving from Pisces into Aries. But the moon will move from Scorpio into Sagittarius early on Tuesday morning. And that actually occurs. Let's move this chart ahead to Tuesday morning, May 13th. That occurs at 1:34 a.m. By noon, the moon is already at 5 degrees of Sagittarius. And when the moon moves into Sagittarius, we feel a bit uplifted. There's a bit of release of energy. There's as the moon moves through into Sagittarius, it's going to kind of be released from its trine to Saturn, and it's going to make a trine with Neptune. It's going to make a sextile with Pluto. It's going to make a trine with Venus and then a trine with Mars, all on the 13th into the 14th. And this feels like we have somewhere to go and something to do. This is an action-oriented day, although there's not a lot of exact aspects cooking from other planets. It certainly is an important piece with the moon moving into uplifting Sagittarius. It's like our vision is back. And even at this time, we still have Jupiter making that sextile to Chiron and Eris. Jupiter to Chiron, is coming closer and closer, and that's less than a degree of orb now. And to Eris, it's just slightly over a degree, but there's hope, there's potential, there's possibility here. On the 14th, we can see the moon now in mid-Sagittarius. It's already past its trine to Mars. It's like the action may be beginning to settle down a bit, but look at that sun coming closer and closer to Uranus. Here at noon, the sun is actually to Uranus. It's actually under 3 degrees of orb now. The sun is also making a half of a sextile to Jupiter. They're both at 24 degrees next door to each other. And in fact, we have a Chiron on the other side at 24 degrees. There's a bit of a hopefulness here about what it is that we might heal or how it is we might move through some of the long-term chronic illnesses that we've been feeling either individually or collectively. That is on Wednesday, the 14th. By the 15th, we still show at noon the moon at 29.5 degrees of Sagittarius, but the moon actually moves into Capricorn just prior to 1 o'clock at 12:57 p.m. On the 15th, we have the moon moving into Capricorn. And as the moon moves into Capricorn, just prior to that, it'll make a square with Saturn and then a square with Neptune. I mean, there is a little need for adjustment here as we become a bit more serious. There may be something that we run into that says, I always think of like it's reality check. Here's the wall. Got to deal with this. That's on May 15th, right around the midday period of time. And the moon actually moves into Capricorn just prior to 1 o'clock at 12:57 p.m. That is on the 15th. As we move to the 16th, again, we can see that the moon in mid-Capricorn is now making an exact square to Venus. And the moon square Venus can be a bit of difficulty of feelings and relationships. It's something, this may not be a big deal, but there's something that doesn't feel right, things we have to do that we may not want to do, things that it's almost like the we can't fully be the ourself that we would like to be because we have responsibilities or rules, and we have to, we have to kind of practice revealing our feelings, even if they're not easy to resolve, so that we can actually not mess things up further, whether it's in a relationship or our, feelings about something happening that is happening on a cultural, political level. Um, the moon square Venus might be a few hours of discomfort. But at the same time, the moon is making a trine with Mercury. And so this is again suggesting that even if we feel uncomfortable, it's really important to methodically and carefully reveal our feelings so that we can process them and move somewhere accordingly that actually works in the big scheme of things. We also see that Venus is here as we get to the 17th. We can see that Venus is now making a half square with the Sun and Uranus, because the Sun and Uranus conjoin technically at 4:32 this afternoon, 4:32 p.m. on Saturday the 17th. And this conjunction is the breakthrough. This is the wake-up call. And it's being half squared by Venus, and that half square from Venus to Uranus occurs a little bit earlier in the morning. It occurs at 10 o'clock. The sun's half square to Venus, and Venus's half square to Uranus occurs at about 3 p.m. I'm sorry, 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. And so I would say that May 17th it's a bit of an instability day, and there's things that are very exciting, but things may not happen in the way that you thought they would or planned on them. And I think that this is all really important, especially because we can get bent out of shape and maybe say something that is not productive. Why do I say that? Because Mercury at 13 degrees of Taurus is making a square with Mars at 13 degrees of Leo. And therefore, we can say something that starts a conflict that may be totally irrelevant. We may lose sight of where we're going and say something just because we want to. We may have so many things going on in our brain that we just blurt something out that then creates a problem that we didn't need to actually. It's not anything useful. That's May 17th. But on the other hand, it's also the potential of great breakthrough that may not feel comfortable because of the semi-squares from Venus, but this is really, really potent stuff and exciting if you can roll with it. That's the 17th. As we get to Sunday, the 18th, and on the 17th at 10:29 p.m., the moon moved into Aquarius. And of course, as the moon moved into Aquarius, it then joins up with Pluto. The moon moved into Aquarius at just almost 10:30 p.m. And since the Pluto is at about almost 4 degrees of Aquarius, it was about probably around 6 or 7 o'clock this morning that the moon actually lined up with Pluto. And there's a sense of intensity here. But the moon going through Aquarius is also going to square all those planets in Taurus. So we need to be careful about how firm we are of belief on something, where we hold on to something and hold on to it, whether it's useful or true, or valuable or not. This is on Sunday the 18th, and we also have the exact sextile between Jupiter and Chiron that I talked about a few days ago. Jupiter sextile Chiron today, and it sextiles Eris tomorrow. And so we're getting that opportunity to do the healing. We're getting that opportunity to go beyond what's normally comfortable into some realm of doing something that actually heals rather than makes things worse. It's a potential for learning, for teaching, and for healing. That's on the 18th. Um, on the 19th, we still have the moon moving through fixed sign of Aquarius. Yeah, we're feeling eclectic. We're feeling maybe a little disconnected from some of the social realities or some emotions even, and we're just kind of like, it's like it's cool. We're good with it, so to speak. But on the 19th, we also have Mars making a square and a half with Saturn. This again, like a half square, is motivational. It's action oriented, but here the action is between gas pedal Mars and brake pedal Saturn. It's between we want to do it for the show, we want to express the energy. That's Mars in Leo, and yet the Saturn at the very last degree of Pisces now, it's at 29 and a half degrees of Pisces, is basically we're at the end of something. We're at the end of something big and something important. And in a way, Saturn is putting the brakes on us and reminding us that just going through at breakneck speed around a curve may be fun for a moment until we hit the guardrail and go over the edge. So we need to watch our speed. We need to watch how hard and fast we assert and or aggress on Monday the 19th. We also have Mercury making a half square with Neptune, which again can be problematic because we may say something that we're assuming is real or we're believing is real, but its half square to Neptune may be that we're deceiving someone else or that someone is deceiving us, either purposefully or inadvertently. That is on the 19th. As we get to the 20th, the moon moves from Aquarius into Pisces. It does that at 5:30 a.m., actually 5:28 a.m. The moon moves into Pisces. And here also on the 20th, we have the sun making a sextile with Saturn. At the very beginning of this talk today, I talked about how we'll have aspects to Saturn, then to Neptune. Well, the sun is making a sextile with Saturn today. I'll say more about that in a moment on the 20th. But then it makes a sextile to Neptune 2 days later on the 22nd. What does this mean? It means that as the sun moves into Gemini, as it does today, just before noon at 11:54 a.m., we can see here at noon the sun is at 0 degrees and 0 minutes of Gemini. This is like it's still spring, but we're now moving toward the end of spring in the northern hemisphere. This is a mutable, changeable sign. We're more adaptable. And the sun is coming now into a trine with Pluto over the next several days that will be exact on the, actually, it's exact on the 24th. So 4 days down the road. But here on the 20th, we're feeling that kind of like, gee, there change is possible. Things out there can change, also things in here can change. But the sun's sextile to Saturn just before noon reminds us that we actually also there's that wall again. There's that we're going around the curve. There's the guardrail. We're reminded to play that brake just enough to slow us down so we can still grip the road. And yet, by the time we get to the Sun sextile Neptune on the 22nd, on Thursday, we may feel a little bit freed from that restraint of Saturn. We'll see how that plays out in a couple of days. Let's move this ahead to the 21st. The moon moving through Pisces. The sun now almost at 1 degree of Gemini, getting closer to the trine with Pluto. The sun trine Pluto now is less than 3 degrees orb. That will become exact within 3 days. We can also see now Venus, how close it is to the trine to Mars. That's 12 minutes of orb. That Venus exact trine to Mars is exact on the morning of the 22nd. Well, let's actually move to the 22nd. on the 22nd, there's a whole bunch of change. First of all, we can see now that the moon has moved into Aries. So we now have the moon, Neptune, Venus, Chiron, and Eris all stuffed into Aries. The moon moves into Aries at 9:25 a.m. and pretty much almost immediately within a couple of hours lines up with Neptune. At the same time, we have the trine between Venus and Mars. This is one of those Venus and Mars are all right tonight, to quote Paul McCartney. Venus is the what we like, the what we love, the what brings us pleasure. And Mars is how we get it. It's the physicality part of it. And when Venus and Mars are trine, there's often a flow of love, of creativity, of energetics. It also can make us lazy, but this is Venus in Aries trining Mars in Leo, and so I would imagine that we're going to be motivated to do something with that energy here on the 22nd. And of course, the sun sextile to Neptune brings in that whole piece of the dream with the moon lined up with Neptune. So the moon and the sun are also sextile. And this is a magical day, or this can be a real magical day. I don't see a lot of negativity here, but there's also a building feeling that something is ending. We're getting to the ending of something because Saturn is now only 11 minutes of arc. That's like just slightly more than a sixth of a degree from beginning its cycle all over again in Aries. That is on the 22nd. Midday on Friday, the 23rd, we can see that the moon is just barely catching up with Venus. Again, there's a sweetness of energy here. That Venus moon together on the 23rd are still within orb of trining Mars. So there is a flow of energy here on the 23rd. However, now Mars is making that square and a half to Neptune. Remember, Mars was making a square and a half to Saturn back on the 20th. And now, 3 days later, it's making a square and a half to Neptune. So before we were having to work that break and we were freaking out perhaps because maybe something wasn't working right. And now it's like we're through that energy and our ideal situation can come back into being. Or maybe we realize that we were reading something wrong and everything is going to be okay. This is the Mars making a square and a half to Neptune on the 23rd. Now, as we get to Saturday, the 24th, we have the moon moving into Taurus at 10:37 a.m. So we can see here by noon, the moon is at 0 degrees of Taurus, 51 minutes, almost 1 degree of Taurus. But certainly the moon in Taurus is going to give us that sense of putting our feet back on the ground. There's a sense of practicality for the couple of days when the moon is in Taurus. However, and this is a big however, we also have at 8:55 this morning, the sun making its exact trine to Pluto. Now, when the sun trines Pluto, this is actually like being supercharged with the ability to either be in control or to be assertive. There's a sense here when the sun in adaptable Gemini is trying the collective consciousness of Pluto in Aquarius. It's almost like we can intuitively rely on knowing when to assert and when to compromise. It's almost like we're able to apply ourselves really hard to get the job done, but we're also willing to go easier when we know we don't have to work so hard. I mean, there can be an obsessive nature around any aspect to Pluto, but I think here it's like having energy in the bank. We got energy to do what needs to be done. This is on the 24th, and especially with the moon in Taurus, we want to get to where we're going. On the 24th, we also have a little bit of an instant replay from the sun's conjunction with Uranus. Remember, the sun conjoined Uranus back on May 17th. Breakthrough, awakening, shock, surprise. Now the sun has moved on into the next sign, Gemini, but now we have Mercury making its sweep across Uranus, and the Mercury Uranus conjunction is exact at 4:15 this afternoon on Saturday the 24th. And this is like a shot in the arm. This is like a brilliance. This is like some excitement. And yet it's in Taurus. We may not necessarily want to go where we're going, but it's like there's no resistance that we have to speak the truth. We have to, break the mold if that's what needs to happen in order to express what we need to express. That is on the 24th. Now, here also on the 24th at noon, we can see that Saturn is at 29 degrees of Pisces and 58 minutes. Well, at 8:35 p.m., Saturn, for the first time in 28, 29 years, it changes signs, and Saturn moves into the first sign of Aries. Let's actually move this ahead to the 25th so we can see now that we have Saturn and Neptune uh, both within the first couple of degrees of Aries. And we're getting now the flavor, a glimpse at what the future will culminate with in next February as Saturn and Neptune actually make their exact conjunction. Remember, Saturn and Neptune will get closer and closer together all the way through June, July, even August, until the retrogrades begin to separate that energy, and eventually they both move back into Pisces. But right now, we're in the future. Things have moved ahead. There's no looking back. There's no going back. We're in the brave new world. We're in a new territory, and it can be very exciting for some. It can be overwhelming for some. It can be absolutely horrendous or difficult for some, but the bottom line is that things are moving forward, and there's no question anymore about the direction in which we are going. And the moon here also on the 25th, we now have Mercury making a sextile with Saturn. Remember, we had the Sun making a sextile with Saturn back on the 20th, followed by a sextile to Neptune a couple days later on the 22nd. Now, with Mercury making a sextile to Saturn, its sextile to Saturn is at 6 p.m. Today on the 25th, and its sextile to Neptune is tomorrow just afternoon at about 1:36 p.m. The distance has closed between the Saturn and Neptune enough so that we're getting the reality check, the heaviness, the work hard, the taskmaster of Saturn coming in to make it real and manifest it, and then the dispersion of that energy, the we can take this and go anywhere, Neptune. And it's all happening right now between the 25th and 26th in our intellect, in our communication, as Mercury makes the sextile first to Saturn and then to Neptune. Let's move this to the 26th, and we can see that by the 26th, the moon has now moved into Gemini. The moon moves into Gemini at 10:21 a.m. And by 8:02 p.m., we have a new moon in Gemini. That new moon in Gemini occurs at 6 degrees of Gemini at 8:02 p.m. And this new moon is very, very potent because it is trine to Pluto. And not only is it trine to Pluto, it's also picking up on the energy of Saturn and Neptune in Aries, because what's happening is we're getting a glimpse again of what's around the bend, what's in the future, as Uranus will move into Gemini, and Uranus will move into Gemini, and it will trine Pluto in Aquarius and make these incredibly potent trines through 26, 27, 28. And here we're getting a little flavor of what that energy might be. We have a high level of adaptability here. And yet there's a real depth of process. It's almost like the deeper metamorphosis, the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly. And we're now moving into the stage where, remember, I said before, we're at the end and a beginning. Well, it's almost like we can't go back. We're at the end, but the beginning hasn't really fully manifest yet. So we're in this invisible never, never land that's no longer what we were and is not yet what we shall become, making it rather exciting and frightening. But the most important thing is it's what we do now. It's how we think and what we feel. It's how we manage our own personal space that will create whatever it is that manifests as time moves on. This is incredibly important period of time. And even though it might not feel stressful, or as stressful as things have felt in the past, it's maybe more important than ever to use this time, this new moon, as a time to plant the seeds of thought. Mercury is really potent now because as the moon moves into Gemini, it lines up with Mercury, and Mercury is also moving toward its trine to Pluto. And Mercury is at home in Gemini, so Mercury is super active as we have the moon in Gemini, Mercury in Gemini, the sun in Gemini, all either moving toward their trine to Pluto, that would be the moon and Mercury, or moving away from their trine to Pluto, and that would be the sun, which trine Pluto exactly on the 24th. So incredibly, incredibly potent here on the 26th. And this new moon carries so much energy with it. And on top of everything else, we also have Chiron perfecting its conjunction with Eris for the first of three times. As I said earlier, it will repeat this conjunction in early October and in mid March of 2026. And this is the potential to heal. This is like very, very potent and very deep and very rare and very subtle, but this is the time to work with this energy, to face those things that make us different, to not just fall into a place of fear or hate if we encounter something that we don't understand or something that's very different than we are. Instead, try to communicate and try to understand. It doesn't mean that we need to be as someone else is if we disagree, but it does mean that compassion and understanding and kindness is important, because if we can understand why someone has come to a different conclusion than we have, that in itself is the saving grace here and the beginnings of the potential of what happens when Chiron catches up to Eris. Very, very potent day. That is the 26th. By the 27th, we have the exact Mercury trining Pluto. We talked about that earlier. This is the ability to talk about things that are very deep and very unknown, even scary, powerful. But this is a time to use language with intention and with purpose, because what we say at this point in time matters. This is on the 27th. Um, as we move to the 28th, we can see that the moon at noon is at 0 degrees and 53 minutes, almost 1 degree of Cancer. The moon actually entered Cancer at 10:32, about an hour and a half prior to noon, at 10:32 a.m. And now, rather than being so jumpy and all over the place, we want to use the next day or two or two and a half days to reground, to assimilate, to find home base again, to settle in. We want to in some way to make our home wherever we are. We want to create boundary. We want to feel safe. That may not be easy to do, because as the moon moves into Cancer, it's also going to square the Saturn and the Neptune almost within a few hours of each other. On midday of the 28th, we'll get a flavor of that Saturn Neptune conjunction that's going to be with us on and off all the way through next January, February, March. That is the 28th. As we move to the 29th, we have Mercury now moving very fast, catching up with the sun. Its cazimi, meaning it's in the heart of the sun, is on the 29th at 9:12 minutes after 9 p.m. And Mercury lined up with the sun is our consciousness, the sun, our willpower. The sun is lined up with Mercury, our words. Again, this is a very potent period of time to use our words in a positive manner because the words can carry extra weight and extra intensity, even though they may appear to be easy and lightweight, as Mercury and the sun are both in easygoing and adaptable Gemini. They're carrying still the power of Pluto through this period of time. That is the 29th. On the 30th, if we look at the moon, it's at 29 degrees of Cancer. The moon moves into Leo at 1:16 p.m. And now we've come full cycle, the moon moving into Leo. There's that sense again of, of the play, of the expressing of what our feelings are on the 30th. And yet there's something else cooking here that's really tied into the 30th and the 31st. And that is that the Mercury and Sun, which were technically conjunct yesterday on the 29th, they're still damn close together, that Mercury makes half squares with Eris and Chiron at 1:20 and 3 p.m., close enough, here on the 30th. And then tomorrow on the 31st, the sun, moving a bit slower, makes those same half squares at about 10:30 in the morning and then at about 3 p.m. on May 31st. And so we have the sun and Mercury having kind of combined with this intensity is now, they are now at a place where what we are saying isn't necessarily easy. This is hard work, but we have to do the work here. The month ends with the moon just leaving Cancer, going into Leo midday on the 30th. And when we go to the 31st, we can see that the moon is well into Leo. And yet that Sun and Mercury, first Mercury yesterday, the Sun today, are making exact half squares with Chiron and and Eris. And the intensity here, the ability of being able to step outside of the box and instead of falling into some place of just making things be more upsetting, especially as Venus is coming into the mix. And we'll start off the month of June talking about how Venus here just hanging back slightly before, at 24, almost 25 degrees of Aries, Venus in the first days of June will line up with Eris and Chiron. And I think and I think that this is absolutely significant because it's sweetening the energy and giving us a reason to find ways to be considerate, to be kind, to be compassionate, even if we're tempted to strike back, even if we're tempted to lash out at someone, even if we're tempted to argue. Instead of arguing, what happens if we just listen? It doesn't mean we agree, but we listen and we let the other person know we've heard them and we give the other person a chance for them to listen to us, knowing that they don't have to agree with us. And this is really, I think, the strength of what happens toward the end of May. Um, all in all, May is an incredibly potent month, but it does not carry the craziness, I don't think. And again, this doesn't mean that crazy shit ain't gonna happen. It just means that I think that there's more room for assimilation and figuring out what we're going to do with the energy rather than just feel like we're a pinball being smacked around and lights blinking and going on and off and not having any sense of control in our lives. So, this is what May is. In some ways, we're in new territory. And they're certainly to quote Bob Dylan, don't look back. There's a sense of we're gone from the past. We'll get a chance to revisit it as both Neptune and Saturn both retrograde back into Pisces. But right now we're in a new world and away we go. And I look forward to seeing those of you who are on Patreon at the solar level. I'll see you for a mid-month update. And for some of you who are floating around England or Europe, I hope to see you over the next weeks ahead. And aside from that, more than ever, think cosmically because it's a whole lot of cosmos to think about out there. And yet we need to understand that the outside and the inside are one and the same. And that even though we're thinking cosmically, acting locally is absolutely important because the only way we really get to make change or as it's been said, all politics are local, and in a way, all politics go back to what it is that happens inside our heads. We need to do the work inside, think cosmically, act locally. I'm Rick Levine. Peace out.